Thank you,
So yeah,
Daphne.
so how changes in technology, changes in culture, changes in financing have affected the literary community. J. Bruce Fuller is a professor, and so we'll be technology changes in culture, bringing us a academic perspective that we sometimes don't get when we're talking, because we all work in the publishing genre sphere.
Yeah. So come back for that if you're interested. It took my all my brain power to remember the name to remember his name. So Daphne, I'm glad you remembered like what they were actually talking about. All right. But so for today, let's talk about character arcs. We're going to be talking about external and internal character arcs and kind of, some of the different shapes that they can take. So I hope that this is interesting for y'all. First, a little bit about me. I am an editor with Tomeworks, just like Daphne and Ian, and Shannon and Sean, our other Writers Lunch hosts. I primarily write science fiction and fantasy. Um, and if you're in Houston, I, along with the other Tomeworks editors, we are all going to be at Comicpalooza next weekend. Not this coming weekend, but like the one after it. So it's Friday, May 22nd to Sunday, May 24th. These I have these two panels here that I am moderating and that the Tomeworks editors are participating in these panels with me. We're going to be talking about cozy fiction. We're also going to be talking about how to write good dialogue. So those should be some pretty interesting panels if you're going to Comicpalooza. There's a lot of really cool literature panels this year. I know Sean is interviewing Matt Dinniman, the author of Dungeon Crawler Carl. He's
Dungeon
gonna be
crawler crawl. We're
and
all
I think they're also gonna have the audiobook narrator there as well. So that'll be cool. And Shannon's running another panel that's about writing, like writing careers.
It's about being successful as a multi-dimensional author, right? So
Yeah.
if you're making money in multiple different fields through your writing.
hmm Yeah. So, but if you're going to be at Comicpalooza, definitely check out the literature panels. They will all be in room 350D and E. That's up on the third floor of the convention center, so you have to go all the way up to the top. But that's where the literature panels are every year, and you can come check that out. They're included with your entrance fee into Comicpalooza, so you don't have to pay any extra to go to the literature panels. Um, Alrighty, so let's get into character arcs. So first, I just want to review briefly the five main elements of character that I talked about last month. I think it was last month or maybe the month before on Writer's Lunch. If you didn't see it, definitely go back through our streams on YouTube. You can find my talk about the kind of five main elements of character. And I want to just briefly review these elements because this is what is gonna inform or your character arc, or these are like the building blocks, right, of your character arc. So every character, especially your protagonist, but even secondary characters need these things as well. Um, your character needs to have a job or a role, and that is a job or a role both within the world of your story and also like a role within the story as well. So who they are in the context of your plot. Thanks, Daphne, for putting the link to that in the chat. Um, your character also needs to have a personal goal, something that they are trying to strive for. This doesn't have to, like in the beginning, this doesn't have to be like the main goal of your story or like the main goal of your series. This just has to be something that the character is trying to accomplish that your readers can root for or against them accomplishing it. Um, Obviously, every character has an appearance, and your character's appearance affects how other characters will relate to them, and it will affect how they think of themselves. So, appearance is a very important element of character that I think sometimes is kind of overlooked because I think sometimes authors don't really consider how a character's appearance influences the way they interact with other people and kind of the way they move throughout the world. So that's also an important consideration. Cultural context is another one of these five building blocks of character. Um, your characters exist within the cultural context of the world that you have built for them. They are not separate from uh, like they're not separate from the world. They exist within it. So the cultural context of that world is important for your character. And then your character also needs to have biases or convictions, things that they believe in really strongly. I think what we talked about when I um, gave a full talk on this, we talked about your character needs to have something they're willing to fight people over. And even if your character is not really a violent person, they should have something that they believe in very strongly that can be challenged by the plot. And we'll get into that a little bit later because an important part of an internal character arc is, and even an external one, is that character having something they believe in very strongly that the plot is going to challenge. And they will either change what they believe in response to the challenges by the plot, or they will be reinforced. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Um, but so these elements of your character are the building blocks for your character arc. This is where your arc comes from. Um, and so definitely like as you are building characters and you're thinking about what their arcs are going to be throughout your story, I highly encourage you to keep all of these elements of character in mind. Alrighty, so now what is a character arc? A character arc is change. And this change can either be experienced internally by your character, or your character can create this change externally of themselves. And so those are your internal and your external character arcs. Um, the uh, throughout the course of your character arc, through the course of their change, whether it's internal or external, um, a really important factor is how your character responds to struggle, because change only happens through adversity, right? So in real life and in fiction, so your plot, your story, you're going to be throwing challenges at your character, antagonists, problems, whatever, and how they respond to that is their arc essentially. Um, and the character arc, when you are working on stories, the character arc is really important to help get readers engaged with your character because your readers can see your character, struggling and like striving and failing or succeeding at the things that they're trying to do throughout the plot. And so this is how you keep your readers engaged is you have this character experiencing things that challenge them, challenges their biases, their convictions, and how they change or create change in response to that. And again, like I said on the first slide, the elements of character are what informs the arc. So especially, I'll go back, especially these biases and convictions down here. If your character doesn't have any beliefs that they hold really strongly, um, there's nothing really. to like change about them as they are, because as they're challenged, they don't really believe in anything. So they're uh yeah, they just don't, they won't really seem to have a strong arc if they don't have something that they believe in really strongly at the outset. The arc will feel weak. So now these arcs, I have this image here showing, the shape of your arc in a upward sloping direction. We're struggling uphill against adversity, but arcs are not always in a upwards direction. You don't always have the character, becoming a better person, going up. You can also have flat arcs, which we will talk about, where, the character, rather than the character changing in response to adversity, rather than their convictions changing, they are creating change externally of themselves. And so that is a flat arc. And you also have, as Daphne put in the chat, I can make him worse. You have downward arcs where your character is becoming their struggles and the challenges against their convictions are actively making them a worse person. And so your arc doesn't have to be in a pot. Yeah, Breaking Bad is a great example of this, like Daphne said in the chat. Your arc does not have to be, positive, my character's becoming a better person, blah blah blah. It doesn't have to be that. It can be flat. It can also be negative. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. So here's a little bit more into the positive and negative arcs. Positive arc, obviously, your character becomes better over the course of the story. They develop their ideas more. They break free of their biases. They rise above their mistakes. They get stronger and better, and they become more confident in themselves. They accept responsibility for the things that they can change or need to change. And so over the course of the story, your reader can then see them becoming kind of the best version of themselves, or the version of themselves that is needed for that story, that is better than what they were before. And the negative arc is just opposite of that. Your character becomes worse. They become defined by their mistakes instead of rising above them, and they deny the responsibility of for things that they can change or that need to be changed. Um, Daphne said this could be a redemption arc, and you do see, a lot of times, especially like over the course of a series, a negative arc can turn into a redemption arc where, in like your first book or your first couple books, you have your hero descending into darkness. And then at some point, they flip a switch or they hit that one thing where like they're not gonna, um, there's one thing they're not gonna do, right? They're not gonna sink that low. And then they turn it around and they start going back in an upward direction.
I was specifically talking about the positive arc, right? So you could have a
Mm-hmm.
character start off neutral or mildly good and become the best version of themselves, or you could have
Hmm.
someone start off abysmally bad and end up being like slightly not as terrible. And
Yeah.
both of those are positive arcs.
Yeah, that's true.
Positive is not necessarily how you feel about the person.
Right, right. Yeah, that is true. Yeah, your character does not have to start out as a good person. And your your character doesn't have to start out as a bad person either. They can just be, kind of neutral. But as long as they have something that they believe in, they can have a satisfying arc. Um, so yeah, whether it's positive or negative. Um, let's talk about, because we're kind of going to be talking about external character arcs and internal ones. So I want to talk about external character arcs for a little bit first. And these arcs I've kind of mentioned a couple of times. These are the arcs where your character is creating change externally of themselves. Your character is changing the world, essentially, or their world, if not, the world at large, the world that they exist in. Um, So these are your flat arcs. And they're also you'll also see them called plot arcs. But these are where, again, the character changes the world without fundamentally changing as a person themselves. Now, just because these are flat arcs does not mean that the character themselves is flat. The character still needs to be a multi-dimensional, fully fleshed out human being, with strengths and weaknesses, and mistakes that they're prone to making, things that they can do well. Um, but their actual arc throughout the story is gonna stay flat. They are not going to fundamentally change throughout the course of your story. In general, these are um, these are characters whose beliefs that they hold strongly are challenged and then strengthened. So the character may believe something really strongly that every time something happens in the plot or every time they do something, it just strengthens their belief and makes them hold on to it more strongly. Um, and these arcs can still be positive or negative for the world, or like, the world at large, if your story takes place on a world scale, or the smaller world that the character lives within. They can create positive or negative change externally of themselves based on um, their beliefs. So what kind of characters are we talking about when we talk about flat arcs, arcs where characters don't really change very much? These are characters who are very committed to an ideal. Um, and their ideal has to withstand constant testing by the plot. These characters, tend to be leaders who can lead other characters to a truth. Or, a lot of times villains have flat arcs, where they are constantly challenged by the um, protagonists, and their beliefs never really change. Um, or, secondary characters a lot of times can have kind of a flat arc. Um, the protagonists that you see with arcs like this are like your archetypal detectives, superheroes. I put Superman on this slide, and characters of that nature who um, they may show up in like your archetypal detectives or your superheroes, right? They show up in serialized, comic books, or like long series of books. And in each installment in the series, their character has not changed. Superman is always committed to truth and justice. And that's his whole deal. That doesn't change. Um, and yeah, so these are the types of characters that you tend to see having this kind of flat character arc. Again, that doesn't mean that these are flat characters. It's just that their arc is flat. I would not call Superman a flat character. I think he's a very fully fleshed out person, with a lot of different opinions and ideas and uh, experiences that shape make him who he is. So some other examples of characters with flat arcs. You may recognize some of these. I have Aragorn, specifically book flavor Aragorn on here. And if you're familiar with both the Lord of the Rings movie and the book, um, Aragorn's arc was changed quite a bit for the movie to give him a more dynamic and a more like internal character arc. In the book, he is already committed to like one day becoming the king of Gondor. Um, versus in the movie, he's like, really kind of not. So in the book, he has more of a flat arc. where his kind of beliefs and convictions are only strengthened throughout the course of the book, and he is, a character who leads other characters to a goal. Your kind of archetypal detective, we've got Benoit Blanc on here, which I know I also have James Bond on here, and Daniel Craig also played James Bond, but this is a screenshot of him in his role as Benoit Blanc. James Bond also, the character of James Bond, I know, like, this is a very long running series, and we have many different actors and many different interpretations of the character by many different actors and directors over the course of like the whole series. But the character of James Bond doesn't really fundamentally change over the course of, at the very least, a single actor's portrayal of that character. He stays the same guy. Um, we've got Zelda from Tears of the Kingdom. And if you're not familiar with Tears of the Kingdom, that's fine. Zelda is a uh, she's not the player character. She's more of a secondary character who influences the story, but her like character is revealed through like a series of flashbacks. And everything that she does is in service of, the goal, which is to, defeat the evil Ganondorf. Um, and her kind of beliefs that that's like, that's right. And, um, uh, like needing to create some sort of power that can defeat him is, only strengthened throughout the course of the game, and it leads her to eventually take drastic measures to try to achieve her goal. And then I have Mulder and Scully from the X-Files, who I was thinking of Daphne when I put them on this slide. But over the course of the series, Mulder and Scully hold true to like the same belief system that they kind of start out with. Mulder believes aliens are real, and nothing can shake that belief that he has. Not even all the evidence gained over all the course of the series. And Scully is a skeptic, and she remains a skeptic the entire series, and that does not appreciably change. So yeah. So these are just some examples of characters who kind of hold to they remain the same person throughout the course of their franchise, and they don't really change very much internally in response to challenges to their worldview. Yeah, Daphne.
Yeah, so with Mulder and Scully, any
Mhm.
sort of Monster of the Week format, you're gonna have your characters largely remain static. Because at the end of the episode or book or whatever, everything is kind of status quo. It's the same for James Bond and Benoit Blanc. Like you have to have that character remain the same because the next book basically just takes over where they were before.
Mhm. Yeah.
Anything where you're writing kind of an incalculable number of parts in the series, if you're writing a series and you don't have an arc already planned for this person, you're gonna keep coming back to them being steady.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. For sure. And again, like, these types of characters, they're not a bad thing. People hear the word flat and they're like, "Oh my God, nothing can be flat. Everything has to be dynamic and changing all the time." No. That's not strictly true. Having a flat arc is not a bad thing. Especially in certain genres where that is the genre convention. Like I said, with superheroes, with your archetypal detectives, the readers want to be able to return to that same character and know that, like, okay, I'm gonna get like a weird mystery, and Benoit Blanc is going to come in, and he's going to be calm and measured and fair, and he's going to be smart enough to solve this mystery every time, and he's not going to get wrapped up in the drama surrounding it because that's the kind of person that he is. So that is kind of like part of the genre expectation for some of these genres is that the characters have a flat arc and that they don't become different people over the course of, the series or the story. All right. Does anyone have questions about flat character arcs? I don't see any questions. Okay, we're going to move on. So now we're going to talk a little bit about internal character arcs. And these are arcs where, in contrast to the external arcs, where your character is changing the world, with internal character arcs, the world is changing your character. So again, I have my my positive arc on here, but they don't have to be positive, they can be negative too. Um, this is where again, your character is undergoing change. The story generally includes a lot of opportunities for your character to learn and become a better person and or a worse person. And they have convictions that may change when challenged. So, particularly characters who have biases or they have like opinions that are demonstrably flawed. Um, these characters are really good characters to give a internal arc to because you can create a story around them that challenges these flawed opinions that they hold and gives them opportunities to revise their opinions into something either less or more flawed, depending on whether you're doing a positive or a negative arc. Oh, all right. So some types of characters that you may see with internal arcs. These are characters in general. These are characters who are committed to a goal, whereas characters with external arcs are more committed to an ideal. These characters with internal arcs are generally more committed to trying to get something done. Like I have Hiccup and Toothless on this slide. Hiccup, his goal throughout, the all of the How to Train Your Dragon movies, he wants to be useful. He has been told his whole life growing up that he can never be a good Viking, he can never be useful to his community, and he wants to prove them wrong. Um, and that does not change throughout like even after he proves himself a useful member of his community, his story is still about, striving to be a useful and good member of his community. Um, but his ideals and his reasoning for that goal do kind of shift and change throughout the course of the story. I mean, he meets Toothless and he realizes that, dragons aren't bad and maybe he can achieve his goal of being useful while also creating this whole new relationship between people and dragons. So his kind of ideals and his biases and his convictions tend to shift a little bit over the course of his story, but his goal remains the same. Um, and a lot of times you will see characters um, with internal arcs who are striving to overcome known flaws. And like again, like in the case of Hiccup, he has been told that he's flawed his whole life because he's this, scrawny Viking kid. And so he is trying to overcome that and find ways to be useful despite that. Um, but yeah, so characters with, internal arcs, archetypally, they kind of fall into like your standard hero protagonist um archetype. Or, like I have on the slide, your kind of standard anti-hero protagonist archetype, depending on whether they have a positive or negative arc. But yeah. Um the main thing with like the internal arcs is your character changes fundamentally as a person um as the story progresses. So like, Hiccup, he realizes that, he doesn't have to be this big burly Viking guy to be useful. And he overcomes the biases against dragons, and he actually leads his people later into like, a new future where they have, this kind of mutually beneficial relationship with dragons. And so he is changing fundamentally as a person, still in service to his original goal, which is to be useful. All right, so some examples. We have Aragorn again. We have movie flavor Aragorn. So again, if you're familiar with the Lord of the Rings movie, Aragorn's arc in the movie is, when it starts out, he is in complete denial of his um, destiny to be the king of Gondor. He does not want it. He wants to just, live his own life and do whatever. But as the story progresses, he like realizes and accepts his destiny as the king and grows into the kind of person that he needs to be to lead Gondor as the king. Um, Luke Skywalker, if you're familiar with Star Wars, this is your standard hero protagonist archetype. Luke Skywalker is, basically nothing and nobody when the story starts. And his arc, he has an internal arc, but also throughout the course of his arc, he has more of like a um he has not only like the internal, like the mental arc, but he also has this transformational skill building arc where he has to build up his skills from like nothing. And so that's also a kind of a variation on that internal arc, where a lot of times you get characters who are changing fundamentally in terms of their internal, biases, um, and they also change externally at the same time. Um, we also have two other characters. We have Essun from the fifth season, and Nahari from City of Brass. Um, And both of these characters, if you have not read these books, I recommend, especially the fifth season. Please read the fifth season. It's so good. But Ian says, I love the fifth season. Yes, you should love the fifth season. It's so good. Anyway, but Essun, throughout the course of the story, and it's a trilogy. So throughout the course of the trilogy, you see Essun through like all of the phases of her life, and you see her change in her beliefs, her uh, kind of how she views the world. But in all that time, she is committed to, um, at least after her daughter is born, she is committed to a goal because her daughter disappears. And so her goal is to find her daughter. Um, but we do see her change throughout all of these different phases of her life. And Nahari, in the City of Brass throughout this series, and this one's also a trilogy, or is it a duology? No, there's three. It's a trilogy. She, changes from a kind of a street urchin who lived in Cairo, into a very powerful person in her own right. And when the series ends, she has very different views about the world and about people than she started with at the beginning. So, uh, yeah. So the main kind of difference that I kind of want you to take away from this between external character arcs and internal character arcs is that with external character arcs, your character is uh, changing the world around them in service to their convictions. With internal character arcs, the world is changing the convictions of your character. So external arcs, your character is changing the world. Internal character arcs, the world is changing your character. And so that's kind of the main difference between the two, kind of distilled down into a single sentence. Does anyone have any questions at this point?
Do you or should you have both in your story?
We're going to talk about that.
Okay.
That's my next thing. A great question. So yeah, we are going to talk about that. And Charlie has the same question in the chat. Can two arcs happen at the same time? So let's get into that. So synthesis arc, and this is kind of this is about not only interweaving plot arcs and character arcs. Um, yeah, that is. It's about interweaving your plot arcs and your character arcs together. But also like uh, we'll talk a little bit about external and internal character arcs and putting them together as well. So, synthesis arc. Your character arcs and your plot inform each other. So having one without the other is only half a story. And so you see in this little graphic that I made, you have your characters striving along their character arc, and all of the plot is happening at the same time. And so the plot that is happening is affecting how they traverse their arc. Let me move this thing out of the way. Okay. So the combination of plot and your character arc is all about this interplay of action and reaction. So when an event happens, you have like your inciting incident or whatever, your character is going to react to that in a certain way and do something that changes, that creates change for the next action. And then the change created from whatever your character does in response to the inciting incident can change your character, and so on and so forth. So you can't have a character arc without a plot. Uh, and we've talked about like plot structure before on Writer's Lunch. And so if you are familiar with like the plot structure graph, I don't have it here, or with different plot structure graphs, your character arc, it doesn't necessarily mirror your plot arc in terms of like having the same shape, but it travels alongside. Your character arc travels alongside the plot arc. So you can't have one without the other. Your characters can also have multiple arcs. In general, within a single book, characters are either going to have an external or an internal arc. You don't because if they have an internal arc, they're changing fundamentally as a person. If they have an external arc, they're not changing fundamentally as a person. So in general, within the same book, you don't see those two things together. But if you're writing a series, then a lot of times main characters of a series will go through multiple arcs, and some of them might be internal, some of them might be external, and it really depends on the type of plot arc that the character also has. So yeah, a single character can go through both types of arcs. You generally won't see it happening in the same book, but sometimes you can if you have um, a character who some of their convictions are being reinforced by the plot, and that's um, uh, kind of in like one aspect of their personality they're staying the same or like being reinforced, and then in another aspect of their personality they're changing. You could argue that they have kind of a combination of an internal and an external arc. Um, a lot of times, though, um, if you're, unless you do that very well, the arc can get kind of muddied, or both of the arcs kind of get kind of muddied by each other, and then it feels less strong. Um, so if you want the character arc to feel very strong, um, in general, it's best to do one at a time, if that makes sense. Which I'm going to talk about, I think, on my next slide. Like kind of expectations for character arcs. So does anyone have questions about this or comments? Okay.
Do you have an example of someone who does this well?
Someone who does both of those types of arcs at the same time.
Mhm. Who does a synthesis arc well?
Mm, oh, I would argue every book, every book has a synthesis arc. Because the synthesis arc is the plot and the character arc. And so the character arc either being external or internal, and then the plot itself informing that. So um, like I mentioned before when I was talking about uh, the fundamentals of character, is the character exists within a cultural context, but they also exist, like from a plot perspective, they exist within a story context. And so the character arc can inform the story, but the story also informs the character arc. They're not separate from each other. And so yeah, I think in terms of like a synthesis arc where I'm talking about, your character arc, thinking about your character arc and your plot at the same time, every story has to have one, if that makes sense. Let's see. Okay, so move on to I have a little bit left. Okay, so some other considerations, and this is just, something to think about. And I kind of mentioned it on the previous slide. Um, I was thinking about this last night because I was trying to come up with like examples for the internal and the external character arcs, and I was having kind of a hard time. And I was like, why am I having a hard time with this? And I realized that it's because, in general, character arcs that work blend in to the story. They blend into the plot arc. If a character arc is working, and I'm just like reading a book as a reader, for my personal enjoyment, if a character arc is working, I don't notice it. Um, because I am noticing everything that's happening all at once. So like the plot and the character, and it's like it's all together in a good soup. Everything blends together and it's all part of the same whole. And together it's all good. But if you have a soup and something's not working, that's when you notice. If you put like the wrong seasoning in there, that's when you notice. And so for me, and I know other people read differently than me, but for me personally, in my experience, when a character arc is working, I'm not noticing it. It's when it doesn't work, when something is not coming together right, or when the character arc, for some reason, starts to feel separate from the plot, that I start to notice and I start to enjoy it less. Um, so the character arc is part of the story. It's not separate from the story. Um, and creating a good synthesis, a good character arc, a good plot arc, um, is really all about balance. I've talked about balance before on Writer's Lunch. That's something that I keep coming back to. But you have to have all the elements in balance. You have to, if you have, like, let's say you have an internal arc and your character is, um, changing over the course of the story from someone who thinks that, I don't know, as a low stakes thing, someone who thinks that, uh, bunnies are disgusting. And they're evolving over the course of the story from someone who thinks bunnies are disgusting to someone who actually keeps a bunny as a pet. That change cannot happen all at once. You can't just like dump. a cup of salt in there right at the end and expect it to work. You have to spread it out throughout the course of the story. Balance it out, balance the plot moving forward with the character arc moving forward. Um, and uh and that's when it starts to like work really well. Daphne, did you have a I saw you unmuted. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, for a more real world ex a realish example, you have a
Hmm.
character whose defining trait is they feel like they can't trust anyone.
Hmm.
And moving them toward a place where they do feel like they can trust people.
Yeah.
And so it has to start with small situations that are forcing them to trust, right? They can't just swap all of it at the end.
Hmm.
But also in the chat, Charlie asks, do you have any way to organize your thoughts when you create the plot and the arcs? So,
Yeah.
little tools on that.
Um, yeah, I'm not I'm not a big outliner. And I know Daphne is. I'm not a big outliner. And so for me, um, I do like world building and some minimal kind of character building beforehand, and like I have those five building blocks of character um before I kind of really dive in. Um, but in terms of like the actual plot and the character arcs, I usually don't really I know my
I'm gonna
process
send
is
mine.
yeah. Because like I don't really organize it. I have an idea of where I want to go, right? I have an idea or no, I have an idea of where I want to end up. I have an idea of my destination, both for the plot and for the character arc. I have an idea of what I want the destination to be, but in terms of getting there, I usually don't have a lot. And so the organization kind of comes for me, it just kind of arises organically as I'm drafting, and then especially as I'm editing. When I go back to edit, that's when I start to notice like, oh, here's this little idea that I can play up a little bit more, and oh, here's this thing that, maybe doesn't quite fit, so I'm gonna get rid of that, or like, and but yeah, but Daphne's presentation on novel planning should be very helpful because she is a big helpful with that because she's a big on outlining.
It does not address character arcs specifically, and I
Mhm.
probably should update it to kind of include more of that. But
Mhm.
I've put in the chat both the link to the presentation as well as the spreadsheet itself.
Yeah. Yeah. So those should be really helpful resources for you for sure. And I think on when we do Ask an Editor this month, are we going to be talking about outlining styles?
We are. We're
Yeah, there we
talking
go.
about outlining
Yeah.
because Shannon and I specifically have dueling outlining
Yeah.
ways of doing things. So we want to talk about the different ways of outlining because none of them are the end all be all.
Right. Right. And the way, so like the way it when I do outline, when I do, because I don't always, but when I do reverse outlines. And we'll talk about that too in our Ask an Editor in a couple weeks because reverse outlining is really interesting. But that's something that happens after your initial drafting stage. That's when you get into the editing. But like I said, that's kind of where, for my process personally, that's where I kind of do that, organization where I'm seeing kind of the Easter eggs of the plot arc that I may have intentionally or unintentionally put into my story, and I'm strengthening them so that they can come out stronger in the end. But yeah, we'll talk about you know pre outlining and then reverse outlining as well in a couple of weeks. Um, but final consideration is that, and I mentioned this before when I was talking about flat arcs, all of your characters need to be well-rounded. Especially your protagonist, particularly your protagonist. Um, Even characters who have flat arcs need to be well-rounded as people. They need to feel like real people. They need to still have, flaws, strengths, things that can trip them up because even Superman has his share of blind spots and foibles. but he still has this, very strong commitment to his ideals that, he uh retains, in spite of um his weaknesses, his like maybe personal weaknesses. He still kind of retains that um very strong conviction throughout his flat arc. So,
And
you
that can be
yeah,
extremely compelling. Like it
yeah,
don't feel like it has to feel boring. His
right.
internal struggle to keep his convictions
Yeah.
can be very compelling. You don't,
Hmm.
it's not that you have to like balance it out with like bangs and action and all that stuff. His
Yeah.
internal struggle just to maintain status quo is compelling on itself.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean that's the really cool part of like those flat character arcs, right? Is that the plot is going to be constantly challenging your character's commitment to their ideal. Like, Superman, again, committed to truth and justice, and a lot of his story arcs, his plots are challenging that, or they're, kind of poking holes in that. It's like, do some of these people that some of these villains that Superman is fighting against, do they deserve justice or like, full consideration, or like, should Superman curb his strength in order to, protect people when, he could kill his villain, but he also has to flatten half a city to do it. Like, so the plot is going to be constantly challenging that commitment, and the character has to find ways to stay committed to their ideal throughout that.
Just to add on to that,
Yeah.
the new Superman movie does a great job with this, where Superman gets involved in a situation that is very politically thorny,
Hmm.
and his convictions come up against society going, well, was that right? Was that
Hmm.
he have done that? And I think that's an interesting way to challenge a character who
Yeah.
doesn't really change themselves.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. For sure. Um, Alrighty. So there's another question in the chat. Is it possible to have a character whose arc is internal but that changes the world anyway? Yes. Absolutely. The and that's where that interplay of let me go back a slide. Oh no, let me go back. That's where your interplay of plot and character arc come in, right? Because with an internal arc, the world is changing your character, right? So the plot, things that are happening, your character is changing because of that. But your character is also driving those things that are happening in the plot. Your character, the plot is happening because your character exists, right? And the things that they're doing are creating that plot that is then making them change. And the plot then ends up changing the world, and your character has changed the world, but they have also changed themselves and they're a fundamentally different person. So yes, all of these things go together. And you can absolutely have a character with an internal arc who is also changing the world at the same time.
So
For sure, 100%.
from a very nitty-gritty perspective, what this
Hmm.
looks like is your character starts off with their conviction and they come up against a new problem. And so they continue with their normal conviction and it doesn't work out. And that is their first inkling of, I might need to change.
Hmm.
Right. And so from there, you can go a couple different ways, right? You can have another conflict arise and they again double down on their conviction and it works out even worse. And you got to get them to this like everything gets worse and worse until they get to a point where like I can't take it anymore. I have to try something else. And that's going to be a very typical story structure.
Hmm.
Um, or you can have them after that initial fail, you could have them just like immediately rebound to try something different.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a number of ways to approach that, but that's like a very specific example of how you can have this interact in your novel.
Yeah. 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 And it's all about you kind of have to like set your character up to fail, right? Like you if you want them to have a compelling internal arc, you have to set them up to fail at something because of the way they view the world, or some conviction that they hold. and that is what propels them to change. Um, and then can also propel them to change the world as well. So yeah, absolutely. You can have both. All right. So that is it for me. We have just a couple more minutes. If there are any questions or comments, feel free. You can put questions or comments in the chat. You can raise your hand, unmute, say something. But we really appreciate you guys being here. Um, Thanks for coming this week. We hope to see you next week for Sean's interview with, oh my God, Jay, Jay something Fuller, JB Fuller. God.
Bruce, J.
Bruce,
Bruce
thank you.
Fuller.
It's like
We'll
it's a
get there, I
B. It's
promise.
a B.
Um, in the meantime, to keep up with all of Tomeworks stuff, we have a lot of events. We have a lot of community building. If you want to know more about us, you can follow us on Substack, and join our newsletter.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, thanks for all the links in the chat, Daphne. Um, And yeah, and if you want to know more about outlining, come back in 2 weeks for our Ask an Editor. We will all be here and talking about different outlining styles. So that should be cool too.